Think about your most confident friend, the one who seems genuinely happy, who's crushing their goals, who people naturally gravitate toward. Now think about their social media presence. Chances are, it's pretty quiet, right? We live in a world that's absolutely obsessed with being seen. Post the vacation, share the win, document the morning routine. But there's this fascinating group of people who've just opted out. And here's the thing, they're not hiding, they're not insecure, they might actually be the most psychologically secure people in the room. Today, we're diving into why some of the most interesting people you know are practically invisible online. And trust me, the psychology behind it is way deeper than you think. Let's start with something counterintuitive. In this day and age, privacy has become a luxury good. Think about it. Your data, your face, your opinions, they're all currency now. And while most people are giving it away for free, some people are holding it close. Psychologists call this having a high privacy orientation, but I think it's simpler than that. These people understand something fundamental. What you don't share, no one can use against you. And I don't mean that in a paranoid way. I mean it practically. That job you didn't get? Not posted, so no pity comments to process. That relationship that ended? Not documented, so no digital graveyard to haunt you. That embarrassing phase? Never archived. But here's where it gets really interesting. Research shows that people with strong privacy boundaries actually have higher self-esteem, not lower. They're not hiding because they're ashamed. They're selective because they're secure. They figured out that oversharing isn't connection, it's exposure. And there's a massive difference between the two. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine you achieve something amazing, but you can't post about it. Does it still feel good? For some people, that question creates genuine anxiety because somewhere along the way, we've been conditioned to believe that if it's not shared, it didn't really happen. The validation became part of the reward. But the people who stay quiet, they've broken that loop. There's this psychological concept called self-concept clarity. Basically, it means you know who you are without needing others to confirm it. You're not crowdsourcing your identity. You're not running every decision through the filter of what will people think. And here's what's wild. Neuroscience research shows that when we post something and get likes, our brain releases dopamine, same chemical that gets released with gambling, with sugar, with any reward-based behavior. Over time, we literally get addicted to the validation. People who don't post, they've rewired that circuit. Their dopamine comes from the actual achievement, not the announcement of it. They're validating themselves internally, which means their confidence isn't dependent on Wi-Fi connection. That's not cold or detached, that's liberated. Let me ask you something personal. When was the last time you experienced something beautiful and your first instinct wasn't to grab your phone? If you're struggling to remember, you're not alone. We've been trained to perform our lives instead of live them. But there's this quiet group of people who've rejected the performance entirely. They go to the concert and actually watch the concert. They cook the meal to eat it, not to photograph it. They travel to places and look with their eyes, not through a screen. And psychologically, this does something profound. It brings them into what researchers call flow state, that feeling of being completely present, completely absorbed. You can't be in flow when part of your brain is already composing the caption. The ancient Stoics had a principle: live for yourself, not for the crowd. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in the world, wrote in his private journal, "It is not what others think of you that matters, but what you truly are." These quiet people aren't rejecting community or connection. They're rejecting performance. They're refusing to turn their life into content. And in doing so, they're actually living more fully than the people who are busy documenting everything. Here's something social media doesn't tell you. It's making you miserable by design. There's this psychological principle called social comparison theory. We constantly measure ourselves against others. And social media is like comparison on steroids. Everyone's showing their highlight reel, their best angle, their peak moment. And we're comparing it to our average Tuesday. Studies show that the more time people spend on social media, the higher their rates of anxiety, depression, and feelings of inadequacy. Not because social media is inherently evil, but because we're biologically wired to compare. And now we're comparing ourselves to thousands of edited, curated versions of reality. People who stay off social media or use it minimally, they've escaped this trap. They're not constantly measuring their worth against an impossible standard. They're not scrolling through someone's vacation photos while sitting in their regular life thinking, I'm not doing enough. And here's the beautiful part. When you stop comparing, you start creating. Your energy shifts from what does everyone else have to what do I actually want. That psychological freedom is priceless. These people aren't missing out. They've realized that FOMO, fear of missing out, is actually FOPO, fear of other people's opinions. And they've decided other people's opinions aren't worth their peace. So here's what I've come to realize. Staying silent on social media isn't a withdrawal from life. It's actually the ultimate power move. Think about it. In a world screaming for attention, the person who doesn't need it holds all the cards. They're not performing for anyone. They're not seeking approval. They're not vulnerable to the judgment of strangers. They're just solid. Carl Jung said that the self is not found in the spotlight, but in the quiet corners. These people have found their self. They know who they are when no one's watching, which means they know who they really are. And there's something magnetic about that. When you meet someone who isn't constantly broadcasting, there's more to discover. They have depth because they haven't flattened themselves into bite-sized content. They're mysterious not because they're hiding, but because they're whole. Their silence isn't empty, it's full of experiences they're not obligated to explain, full of growth that doesn't need an audience, full of a life that's being lived, not performed. That's not antisocial, that's self-possessed. And in this day and age, being self-possessed might be the rarest thing of all. So the next time you notice someone who's barely online, don't mistake their silence for absence. They're not missing out. They're fully present, just somewhere you can't see. They're proof that you don't need to be visible to be valuable, that real confidence doesn't need an audience, and that the most meaningful life might be the one you never post. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments, and hey, maybe consider what you're choosing not to share today. Sometimes what we keep private is what keeps us sane. See you in the next one.